I'm sitting in the lounge of the Ulysses, sailing from Holyhead to Dublin. The first day of what will no doubt be a nightmare journey back to the land of leprechauns and linoleum, the land of Wilde and Spencer, Trollope, Yeats and Synge. Look after yourself, Murph. We'll see you when I return. Thank you very much. The last time I was in Ireland was just a year ago, and I was being driven by a Dutch friend of mine, a printer and a publisher. We were driving in County Donegal and near Glentees, late at night, crashed into a great boulder which smashed the wheel clean off the car. Things should be better this time. It's a nice day, we've got a new driver and a new car. And so I'm optimistic and enthusiastic. What I see as a magical element in Ireland is one, its history and its past. And the place is rich with castles and abbeys and roofless churches and ruins, and there are dramatic landscapes and dramatic coastlines and dramatic seascapes and fascinating islands. But there's something else. There are many parts which are very like the England that I knew when I was a boy. It's a very lovely country, and for somebody who's interested in art and landscape, there's none better. These swimmers are at the 40 foot, which is a rocky strewn bay just below Joyce's Martello Tower at Sandy Cove. I came here first in the late 60s, some 30 odd years ago, and did many paintings of Joyce's Tower and the area round about. This was an early painting of 1971. Another painting about the same time, showing a view from further round. And a tiny sketch drawing I did, perhaps in 1970. And I'll go up here and we'll have a look at the tower today. It's James Joyce's Ulysses with the introduction by Gilbert and the illustrations. They're lithographs, I think, by Henry Matisse. It's a very famous edition, and that's been given by Cyril Cusack. Nice and free drawings, aren't they? My father was an exciseman in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and perhaps some of his interest in Irish literature and Irish history came or stemmed from that time. Edward Martin, Oscar Wilde, J.M. Synge, James Joyce, and all the other people who'd been here, lived here or visited here. And we had plenty of these books about in the house. And he would often talk about his time in Ireland. And as I came to visit Ireland, both north and south, I began to realise increasingly how much my father must have started in my developing interest in the country, its past, its history, its difficulties, and its developing hopes. He was a lasting influence on much of what I do. Dear Murph, I write this from the Port View Hotel in Dunleary, having burnt my back in the shower. Reddy's cold here and blue hot, and I was daft enough to think it was the other way round. I'm going to Dublin to look at some murals, and then over to Galway. Kind regards. I'm on a Connell Street bridge overlooking the Liffey. I was here in 1948 when I first came to Ireland and walked up the east coast with a friend of mine sleeping rough. A street photographer took a photograph of us at that time. I'm back in Dublin, still with books under my arm, and I'm being photographed by another street photographer. I'm sitting in Davy Byrne's pub in Duke Street in Dublin. This is the pub where Joyce described them having far too much fat on the parsnips, and the cheese was decidedly feety. It's well known for its collection of pictures, framed pictures and murals. I'm interested in all forms of mural, good, bad and indifferent, because I was trained as a mural painter. They make a public statement, and the unusual thing about them is that they continue speaking to any who will listen for the whole of the life that they're on the wall. It's 10 o'clock at night and I'm at Dunamace near Port Leisure. It symbolises a lot of what I've become interested in medieval Ireland, the history and the remnants, the shards of what's left are symbols and signs and indicators which evoke all sorts of thoughts and ideas for painting and drawing and printmaking. I've visited many of these places, but this, like Cashel, is one of the outstanding monuments that encapsulate almost so much of the past. I found it a very strange experience, really, going back to Ireland. So much time had passed, which cannot be recaptured or reclaimed. And when the span that is past is compared with the years that are ahead, well, I suppose one's bound to feel, have I made the most of things? It comes as a brutal realisation that the answer is no, I've wasted much of my time. So I felt angry, really, with myself. Each time I've come to Malcolm Yorke Castle, it's been raining, and today is no exception. I came here first 30 years ago and have done woodcuts, watercolours, drawings, etchings of this castle. I've got here a lithograph that I did many years ago for the monks of Mount St Bernard Abbey in Leicestershire. Dear Murph, I'm sitting in a hostelry called the Daily Grind in Galway, a pub with a real sense of humour. The gents is 4 flights of stairs up 34 narrow steps. By the time you get there, you hardly need it. You wouldn't like it at all. I've always been interested in Ireland and Irish books, and I've illustrated a number of my own. I've got 2 or 3 here. One by a poet, Frank Lissauer, now dead, A Visit to Ireland. That was in 1975. Another one published locally from Yates Tower at Thor Ballylee, which was done for the Friends of Thor Ballylee in 1973. And another one on Kilcolman, the castle of the poet Edmund Spenser. It was an account of his difficulties in Ireland and his eventual fleeing from Kilcolman, and that was published nearly 30 years ago. I've always lived with them. My father was a great reader, and the house was full of drink and books, even when there wasn't very much food. But I've always been interested in writing and illustrating and binding and printing, making paper and setting type, and eventually a little bit of publishing. Hello.
People sometimes ask me, what is it that makes a Rigby Graham picture? I don't really know. It's very difficult to define, but it's easy to recognise. As far as painting landscapes and buildings and settings are concerned, I just keep my eye open until I see something that looks very much like the sort of things I paint. And then I sit down and try and paint it. It may sound odd, but actually it's fairly important that what you paint is going to maintain your interest, concentration, fascination for the time that you're working on it. So there are certain subjects and certain aspects of subjects which I have always found of deep and all-consuming interest. It's Kilmacduagh, where the last time I painted here was in 1970 or maybe 1971, and the parts of it have been repaired and rebuilt, and the weather, although it's pouring rain, or it has been pouring rain a little bit earlier, is far better now than it was then. But I find it a very moving place. You know, it's sad and tragic, and I find it sad sitting in a graveyard surrounded by dead bodies. I suppose I'll be one of them shortly. It must have been quite an extensive monastery. When you realise how much building of this kind went on under, at times, very difficult conditions, and the people lived, many of them, considerable hardship, it brings you down to earth, makes you realise how lucky that we are in many respects today.
whether one is a believer or not, many of these places were built with considerable, a lot of faith and hope and belief. And that must have been, I'm sure that was very satisfying to the masons and the monks and the people who, or many of them who worked here. And although I'm not a spiritual bloke and I have very odd beliefs, I lead a life which has quite a lot of quiet reward in what you try to do, even though a lot of it doesn't come off. I've painted a lot of abbeys and castles and churches and so on here, and I've painted modern things as well. The light's been changing all the time here, as it does in these places, and I would have liked to have got further away and included the round tower and some of the outbuildings, but the foot and mouth regulations which are all round mean that we're confined a bit here. But in an odd way, it doesn't matter where you paint or what you paint, really. There's an incredible amount to see and do and enjoy. And although I've had odd ups and downs in life, odd difficulties, I've had a very rewarding life in a way. I've been enabled to paint much of what I wanted in the way I wanted, and as for many years I never had any kind of customer base. I wasn't bothering too much about the market, and there's not many people can say, fortunate enough to say that. But under these conditions, light conditions which are changing, and the wind and the rain, one can only get an approximation of it all. But if one can get a little of the spirit of the place and the tragedy and the sadness and you're always aware of the transitoriness of our life and so on. Not a bad thing. You can't go on forever. And I think a lot of parts of Ireland and England, Scotland and elsewhere, I think there's enormous amount of loveliness left, and that's worth a great deal. I'll just do a bit more pen work. Did you see that? It's a reed. I've given up using nibs. I like pens, partly because they're sharp and hard and you can't alter what you've done. And partly we've had pens for years. The old monks used pens in their scriptoria, and they still use the term penknife, and people have pen knives, but most people don't sharpen these reeds as they used to. I think drawing wobbly's become a full-time job with me here. I couldn't draw a straight line to save my life now. A funny thing, the nib not only scratches, you occasionally get it on the edge and it sort of chirrups. You know, the process talks to you.
sign this, then I know who I am. There's always an element of sadness, I suppose, in looking back, and things are not always as you remember them. So there was a sense of sadness that I experienced, but at the same time there was also a sense of considerable exhilaration at seeing places that had impressed me years ago, and they still impress me just as much. I've painted in this strange limestone landscape many times over the last 20 or 30 years. The land is made up of pavements with grikes between, and these support many kinds of wildflowers. All over this area are these large boulders, erratics, which are brought down by the glaciers during the last ice age, and I've often used them in drawings and paintings and book illustrations and elsewhere. I've worked in quite a wide range of different media, painting in oil and tempera and watercolour, lithography and etching, woodcuts and lino cuts, stained glass, ceramics, fabrics, all sorts of things really. People might think the range is wide, but each medium, each method, each group of materials have their own particular flavour, and some things are much more appropriate than others at different times. I like printmaking, I like the flat quality of printmaking, but printmaking, whether it's woodcuts or lino cuts or etchings or silkscreen, you've really got to do those things in a workshop. But when I'm painting outside, whether one's drawing in pastel or working in watercolour or acrylic or Indian ink and wash, the conditions are very different. You can't control the wind and the weather, you can't control the light, and so you have to work fairly directly and fairly quickly. And some media, like watercolour, are particularly suited to working outside. It's fairly quick, it deals with water, and we live in a very moist landscape, very moist, humid atmosphere. Watercolour lends itself very much to the conditions in this part of the world, and it's a tradition into which I've been very happy to play a very small part. Dear Murph, I'm writing this on a roughish crossing from Dublin to Inishmore. Heavy rain and everything and everybody wet. Things at present look decidedly shaky. Should be in for an entertaining day. And then the journey back. We'll write later if we survive.
A bit rough down there with everybody being sick. Well, we're just setting off, trying to see if we can get as far as the Plassey, ship that went aground here, I think nearly 40 years ago. Too bloody old for this malarkey. There were several views, 2 or 3 views, which I would like to have done. I had to choose one. It seemed to me fairly dramatic. I wanted to get as much of the length of the ship in as I could. As usual, I made the wrong decision, so I'm beginning to have second thoughts. Although the ship is almost in silhouette, there is some reflected light coming off the rocks, going back onto the ship, so it's not completely black, although it is in darkness. The sea air is so moist at the moment that none of this is drying, so everything's running and smudging. I suppose it's part of the charm and enjoyment of working under difficult conditions. And now that I've poured half my bottle of Indian ink down my trousers, one's got the added pleasure of working in complete discomfort. But I'm certainly very glad to have got here today. First after the rough start, but more important, I think, the fact that I saw this so many years ago and it's still here. It's a nice contrast, though, between the rusting iron of the boat and the bluey grey of the limestone rocks of the Burren, which are normally very sharp and rough, but here they've become softened and smoothed by continual erosion of the water, the sea. Because in a way, the whole place is a silvery grey. The sky, the rocks, the landscape and the skyscape are all one colour really, the light bouncing off. And the ship now rusting hulk, gradually turning back into iron oxide. You can go on with these things, but eventually you just knock the life out of them. It's better to leave things incomplete. Things half said are often more effective, aren't they? I'm a bit annoyed with that yellow bursting in the bag. And all life's a messy business, isn't it? Birth apparently is messy, although I don't remember that. Death, I understand, is pretty messy. And what I've chosen to do in between is the same. You can sit at home and paint neatly in a studio or drawing room. But the spirit's gone out the window, hasn't it? Far better out here. Trying to work in the wind and the sun. I said, why ever did they have to invent the motor car? This is the way to travel, isn't it? Very good day. It was brighter than I imagined from this morning, from all the weather this morning. No, it's come out beautifully. You couldn't get it better than this, could you? My mother came from the Hebrides and was interested in music and Scottish dancing. And I suppose from her I must have absorbed something of my interest in and love of the whole Celtic background. My father, who was also of Scottish descent, was interested in art in a general way, and architecture and engineering and engineers. But his real lasting interest was in English and his love of words, the origins of words, the origins of names of pubs and roads and mountains, the use of phraseology, the different dialects and accents. He could tell where most people were from immediately on hearing them speak. And that is something I have also inherited from him. Mural painting in the West has declined somewhat. Oh, that's Miko Russell of Dublin. He was one of a family of tin whistle players. I met him on several occasions in a Connor's bar. He's dead now. Dear Murphy, yesterday I went to paint the Plassey, a rusting wreck of a fine ship, its back broken on a boulder-strewn ridge. I had a ride in a governess's cart pulled by a 5-year-old horse called Tom. It was good to listen to his hoof beats on the road as he changed gear from walk, trot, canter and gallop. Little traffic, no mobile phones. It was idyllic. Sod it! See if this one works. The last time I was here, just a few years ago, this Newtown Castle was a ruin. It was covered with saplings and plants, and part of the top was missing, it hadn't got a roof. And now, just a few years later, I find it's the Burren College of Art. I spent 37 years in places like this, art college studios and art rooms, 7 years as a student, and 30 years trying to teach. I've often thought I would have liked to have been a full-time painter sooner, but looking back, I'm not very sure about that. Teaching gave me a salary of a sort. It enabled me to do what I wanted to do in what time there was left. And there wasn't much of that. But it also made me independent and cussed. And that's proved to be very helpful. It's a bit like tethering a bulldog near a tin of food, near a tray of food. And then after 30 years, letting him loose to get at it. Now that I've got to the tray of food, I don't know that it was worth waiting for all that time, but I'm enjoying it. Of all the tower houses and £10 castles which I've drawn and painted in Ireland, north and south, this is the only one that I've actually seen, which is a round tower on a square base. It gives the building enormous defensive strength and of course gives it a very distinguished and sharp batter. Dear Murphy, I'm on a fishing boat, wobbling over to Skellig Michael. I feel like a cross between Brendan the Navigator and Coombs Dr. Syntax. I have the umbrella, all the painting kit, but not the horse. Trust all is well with you. Best wishes.
We're on Skellig Michael, off the southwest coast of Ireland. It's a pinnacle of rock out in the Atlantic, and it was a monastery founded here, they think, by St. Finian. He was the patron saint of high places. And it's a friendly place because there are thousands of birds, many, many puffins. It's worth coming just to see the puffins. But it's worth coming to for other reasons as well. It's always been a bit of a struggle for me to get up places. Last time I came I was 38 or 40. I'm 70 now and my knees are not so good. People sometimes wonder whether the difficulty of getting to these places and the atmosphere, does it affect the pictures I do? Well, yes, it does. On two counts. One, it's often difficult and sometimes impossible to draw or paint in the mist and the drizzle and the heavy rain. But on a different level altogether, the isolation and the splendour and the mystery affect me. There is a frisson. The hairs on the back of your neck rise up. It causes an almost primitive response, partly wonder, partly fear, partly humility at the power of natural forces or the effect of the myths and tales and truths of the spiritual side of things. Absolutely splendid places, and they've cleaned them out here since I was here last. This is all much more open now. When I was here on the previous occasions, it was all rubble and overgrown, and there was very little of this you could walk through. But now they've cleaned them all up, you can see far more and you can understand much more of what the history and development of the place was like. There's some sea pinks up there. The last time when I came, the whole place was covered with these flowers hanging off the walls like great puff balls. I'm very surprised to see it like this, and very pleased as well. I suppose I have a certain affinity with the way in which some of the monks, the anchorites, and hermits have lived in the past. Not that I would want to be a monk, but I do see enormous value in isolation from time to time. It gets the cobwebs and the anger out of your head, and you appreciate what there is which is worth thinking about, and what there is which is not worth worrying about. I think there is an enormous amount of loveliness and beauty, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm proud of it and I enjoy it and I'm involved with it. And although some of my life has been not always easy, being involved in with art, it's a great privilege, and I'm proud of that and grateful for it. Right, leave it at that. Too wet. I'm sometimes asked what I think my pictures might do or achieve. I don't really know. I hope that some people might see them and see in them and get from them some of the excitement and pleasure and thought and enjoyment that I have experienced in sitting in some of these places and trying to represent in a small way some of the thoughts and feelings that these places, these rocks, these ruins, these wrecks and other things I've painted. I hope that something of what I have tried to point out causes a similar response in the spectator. If it does that, then I've achieved something. If it doesn't, I don't suppose it matters at all.
Hello, Murphy. Did you get the postcards? Hey, Murph, did you get the cards? Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
to educate, entertain our customers.
Okay, so now we're going to look at some other of his prints.
Thinking very seriously about stopping making pots.
But there's nothing forced, and I think his jugs are really the epitome of that.
Hello, welcome to today's broadcast from the Goldmark Gallery.
One of my most regular places to visit up in this part of the world is the Goldmark Gallery.